The Sock Jig Sneaker Podcast. Podcasting out of machine revving tension. Welcome to episode 75 of the Sock Jig Sneaker Podcast. You can find me on Twitter at SockJig and on Instagram at SockJig, and I guess on Blue Sky at SockJig as well too. I haven't fully set up over there, but if you are migrating over there, I am over there as well too. Up front, before I do anything else, I wanted to say rest in peace to DJ Clark Kent. You know, whenever someone passes, it's always a clear sign of what's like truly important in life. That is your friends and your family. And then what is secondary in life, which is your work and your interests, which is sneakers and music, for example. And you can use those secondary interests in your work or to create art or commerce, but you can also use them to build community and to make friends. And that's creating culture. That's DJ Clark Kent. So rest in peace to a true pioneer. So for this episode, it's the return of the Sneaker Guy of the Week. I have a new segment called We Are So Back, or It's So Over. And for the main topic, originally I had planned a very different show to talk about some evergreen things like a heat check on the current crop of collaborators and even talk about some of the issues that ALD has been having this past year. And I had recorded some of that, but I didn't finish, and I'm postponing it all to the next episode because a lot of stuff happened, and I wanted to use this time to talk about my spat with the editor-in-chief of Complex and what happened there. The very short version is I took a shot at her in the last episode, and then I kind of posted it on Twitter, and she shot back on me on her Instagram story, and I responded on Twitter. And if you're in the it's not too deep camp, then this segment might not be for you. But I'll explain what happened and my response and some of the backlash I got. And really, this is about criticism versus hating, about me being anonymous and punching up versus punching down, and also how past interactions with people you're criticizing may color how fair or unfair you are to them. Like if someone says some shit about you before, or if you just thought they have a whole bunch of bad takes and then something else later comes on, and then you might be more critical of them because of your feelings that you had of that person. And so I don't really talk about what happened between Little Yachty and Bima Williams at ComplexCon. I can refer to it here in this intro because I record these intros at the very end when everything else is done. But some of the things I mentioned in this Complex segment do apply to what happened between Little Yachty and Bima there. For example, it's very possible that Bima heard Little Yachty say he didn't listen to Jay-Z or Wu-Tang, and then that informed how harsh he was going to be to Little Yachty's shoe. And Bima did reference that Jay-Z Wu-Tang stuff in his original video that he did that set off Little Yachty. So timeline-wise, this episode is kind of a jumble. It's kind of a mix because it was originally supposed to come out 2 weeks ago, and some stuff might be dated because of that, but oh well, those segments were already in the can, and I tried to cut in a few times and explain when and what was recorded. For example, I referenced the controversy of the No Women at the Complex Sneaker of the Year panel, but I don't really talk about Marissa Hill, Shade TV's controversial comments on Twitter because I had recorded that part in between all that happened. But overall, a little sidebar here, if it's women's business, I kind of stay out of it. You know, I'll retweet women that I agree with and move on. And maybe that's right or wrong. I don't know. It's just how my, I guess, brain is wired. You know, once I was told the backstory of two women that had a problem, and one of them was telling me what happened, and the details were all women's business. So I was listening and responding with, oh, wow, that's crazy. But I knew I'd forget it all because in my head, the brain was just saying, this is all women's business. I don't need to remember this. And that's exactly what happened. I forgot it all. So after, when you're told, hey, don't tell anyone, don't worry, your secret's safe with me because I don't remember it at all. Last thing I'll say on that main segment is that it's not intended for me to just rant and rave about Complex, then put them on blast or pushing back at me. I already did do that immediately on Twitter. And, you know, if I didn't really have a podcast, I would have just left it on what I said on Twitter. But because I'm loyal to my podcast listening audience here, I feel like that they'd want to hear my kind of thoughts on this. So that's what this is. It's supposed to be my thoughts here after some reflection on what happened, what was fair and unfair, where there was a disconnect, and just kind of get it all off my chest so I can just like let it go. You know, spite can be a motivator, but it can also become a weakness if you don't let go of the anger. But before all that, pickups, skips, and misses. On feet lately, I've been wearing some older sneakers. I wore the Fragment Travis 1 lows, which I haven't worn very much at all since Dana White started wearing them a lot. So those really are one of the best Travis ones. The quality on them is really good. I'm glad to have them in the collection. I also wore the Sean Wotherspoon Air Max 97 1, which I haven't worn in probably like 2 years. And that's still a great shoe. The corduroy on my sneakers is a little ruffled now, so it actually looks pretty good still. And it's one of those shoes where it really does look good. A little beat, but looks completely shit when it's like 2 beat. For pickups, nothing. I have not picked up anything since I last recorded, which is probably the first time I've ever said this on this podcast after 75 episodes. There are episodes, of course, where I skip stuff, so there probably would have been ones if I had mentioned it, but really nothing that I've picked up since then, which is quite the accomplishment. You got to congratulate yourself for not buying something, for not being a shopaholic for once. Well, the first thing is, of course, to admit that you are a shopaholic, that you can't live without shopahol. For misses, I missed out on the Unheard Of Rivalry Low, the Cincinnati shoe that the Unheard Of store came out with. The shoe itself looks like the bricks on the bridge in Cincinnati. It's a skate shoe that's fun. I think it's fine to do this kind of stuff on a skate type of shoe. SB does it all the time. But the rollout of that sneaker was really fun. They had a good character for it, a Captain Piggy. I'm not sure how a pig got certified to be a boat captain, but here we are. It had a special box. It was limited to 1,000. It's for a good cause, Children's Home in Cincinnati, which is a children's charity, which the owner Phil has ties to when he was himself there at one point early in his life. And so, a lot of the check marks that I talked about in my how to release a collab series, like they really did hit a lot of that stuff. The goal being to get more than just a shoe out there and to sell a shoe. It was to get your brand and your store over. And Phil just did exactly that. He represented the city well. He represented his store well. He represented his brand and himself really well throughout the whole thing. So congratulations to them on a really successful sneaker release. Next up is probably going to be a Skyline chili sneaker. Are you ready for a spaghetti and cinnamon chili sneaker? That's like a Cincinnati specialty dish if you haven't heard of it and probably don't want to hear about it. For skips, I skipped out on the Howard University Jordan 1. The colorway and everything was super nice. The leather looked awesome. I really just have too many Jordan 1s, and that's exactly why I started wearing that Fragment Travis 1 again. I was like, I'm not going to let Dana White ruin the sneaker for me. I need to just wear that instead of buying this Howard Jordan 1. I skipped out on the Ama Manier 95, and what's hilarious about that shoe is it looks so different in every single photo that was posted early. And then that one Joe LaPuma photo that he posted, I don't know, I think that photo did more harm than good because I don't know what the lighting was wrong or something on there, but everyone in the replies was just like, this shoe looks horrible. The funniest one was my friend Doug said that they look like the Cortez fakes, and once he said that, that's all I saw all the time. I also skipped on the highs and lows Hal Asics Gel Keanu 20, the toddler shoe straps one. And that's one of those shoes where the photos that he posts look awesome. Like he really does a great job with photography and making that shoe look good. They're very unique photography style to him. If he does it himself, the owner of Highs and Lows, or if he hires someone to do it. At one point, I got early access because I have bought all the previous 1130s that they came out with. And at that point, you know how early access warps your mind that you're like, oh, maybe I should cop it to support. Or you start talking yourself into maybe I do need this. Because I have been selected, I am worthy of buying the sneaker. And a few years ago, I had a knee injury that I've been slowly recovering from. And then if I had that knee injury still, I probably would have copped it because then it'd be easy to put on with the toddler straps. And then I was like talking to myself like, maybe I should get this in case I re-aggravate my injury. But then I also don't want to like jinx myself and put bad juju out there and buy something for a potential re-aggravation of a knee injury that I'm finally getting better. So that was the final decision. That was my thought process in finally saying, no, I don't need this toddler shoe. And then you kind of snap out of it later. And it's like, why did I spend so long thinking about a toddler strap shoe? Sneakerheads will buy sneakers for one day of the year, like the Halloween sneaker or the Valentine's Day sneaker. But are you at the level of a sneakerhead where you will buy for future things that you might do? I might get into hiking one day, so I should buy this Action Bronson hiking sneaker. Or I might re-aggravate my knee injury one day, so I should get a shoe with straps on it. I'm not saying this me, but could be me. It could be anyone. It could be anyone listening right now. I don't know. It could be you. I also skipped out on the Wu-Tang Dunks, and that was like the first trial run of this re-release Grails era. And for this one, it seemed like a lot of places got it, and they probably didn't get that much stock, like 12 to 20 pairs or whatever, a size run or two. But every like C and D level store everywhere had them. So it wasn't exactly hard to get, but they still sold out, which is probably what they wanted. They wanted big numbers, but still with the illusion of it being coveted and hard to get. And about grails and stuff, I've gone on the record before and said, they need to tell news stories, but I'm not against people being very satisfied that they got something that they never dreamed they'd ever get. So happy for the release, happy for them, happy for Brizza and anyone else who copped. For upcoming sneakers, I just wanted to talk briefly about the Black Cement 3s. I still have my 2018 pair, and it's wild, first of all, to think that that was 6 years ago. But that pair was awesome. It was one of the best quality retros they've ever done on a Jordan 3. So I'm very happy with my pair and don't exactly need a 2024 pair, which seems to have the lighter elephant print on it. But I'm just speaking for myself. I'm not speaking for anyone else out there who missed out on that one or trashed their pair since or whatever. But this is one of those best sneakers of all time. So it'll be a huge release, and I hope the quality is good. I know there's lots of early pairs out there and saying that it's not that good, but for me personally, you can't go wrong with a Black Cement 3. The Black Toe 1, that was also pushed to 2025. That was actually a sneaker I was looking forward to seeing this year, but what's weird about that one is like it seems like stores were told to basically hold their inventory till February because a lot of them were ready to release and then told like you can't release. So I don't know how that works for stores. Like, I don't think they could just send it back to Nike when they've already paid for the pairs or pay for shipping to send it back. Like that part I'm unclear of. I don't know if they, like it's supposedly net 30 or net 60. So you have to pay within 30 days or 60 days of receiving them. But accounting wise, like if you pay for it in 2024, but you don't get the revenue from it from 2025, either way, it's could be rough, or it's going to be rough if you don't have the space to store them. Like, it does cost money to store something in your warehouse there or in the back room, because if you didn't have that there, you could have something else that you could be moving and selling and turning over. Whereas these, you can't turn over until February. So that's probably why they're so cheap on the resale apps right now, because some stores out there, they probably can't do what I've just talked about. They probably can't keep it in their warehouse till February, or they need money on the books in 2024. So if you can sell it on GOAT or StockX and get your money now, then that's what it seems like they're doing, because there's a lot of pairs out there. I saw my size 12 at 182 for one day. At retail is like 180, and some smaller sizes like size 9 and stuff I saw under retail. So it's tough out there, especially having to hold something in your warehouse for 3-4 months. The sneaker guy of the week is the guy who thinks the John Geiger 004 is the sneaker of the year. This is anyone on Twitter who has been declaring that the John Geiger shoe has been the best sneaker of the year since like August or whatever. And if you don't have him in your top 10 at the end of the year, then I don't care what you have to say about anything about sneakers, because you clearly know nothing. You shouldn't even be in the top 10. He should be in top 3 minimum. And if John Geiger didn't personally send you a pair, that means you're obviously biased against him and your opinion can't be trusted about him at all. So do us all a favor and just delete your account right now. Otherwise, you're going to be blocked, and not only will you be blocked, you'll be boycotted, and there'll be protests. There'll be protests with picket signs outside your work. We're going to have a sign-up sheet, and people are going to take shifts around the clock. So just get ahead of it and do us all a favor and just declare it the sneaker of the year. If Complex does not put John Geiger's shoe in the top 5, let alone top 3 or number 1, oh man, we're going to have to bully them like we did last year when they took that hideous Drake Nocta shoe off. And if it's December and it's the Complex Sneaker of the Year panel and Little Yachty is up there with Vashti and they're not arguing about the John Geiger 004, I want Joe LaPuma put in the device. Bring me Joe LaPuma in the pillory device so we can throw tomatoes at him. So they can avoid all that right now by just putting the John Geiger 004 shoe as the sneaker of the year. When John Geiger wins the sneaker of the year and you're near a convenience store, any type of 24-hour store, you go into that store and put your hand in the cash register for no reason. Their money is your money as of right now. So, if any of that resembles what you think about the John Geiger 004 sneaker, then you are the sneaker guy of the week. Okay, I'm cutting in here because the segment that you're about to hear was originally recorded on November 8th and November 9th, well over a week ago. I'm putting this disclaimer in here because the last two talking points of this segment are related to the Complex Sneaker Podcast, doing fewer podcast episodes, and my very brief thoughts about women's representation and the sneaker panel stuff that they have for the Sneaker of the Year at ComplexCon. And this is all recorded well before Marissa Hill of Shade TV posting her controversial Twitter thread about it as well too, so I don't even talk about that. I'm recording this disclaimer now on November 14th, basically a week later. So some of this segment is a little dated because this podcast episode was supposed to come out a week ago, but I'm leaving it in here because it shows what I thought about Complex and their panel and all that kind of stuff well before Complex editor-in-chief Aria Hughes posted her Instagram screenshot sub at me. So that's the context you need to know. And then after this segment, I'll come back and I'll talk about that sub stuff. All right, this is a new segment I've come up with called We Are So Back or It's So Over, where I'll talk about some topics and I'll either alternate between We Are So Back or It's Over. You know, sometimes it might be within the same topic as well too. So this is kind of a work in progress and we'll see how it goes. So first up, we are so back. Sneaker beefs, sneaker podcast beefs to be more specific. This one is with Ben Baller versus Sneak Diss podcast. There was some video going around Ben Baller a couple weeks ago where, you know, he's at some Got Soul event talking about how he had every single shoe 3 years before anyone ever heard of it, or the usual, you know, Ben Baller exaggerations or just outright lies, whatever he does. And Greg from the Sneak Diss podcast quote tweeted it and said, "We're doing top 10 dweebs in sneaker all time." And that's it. The word dweebs is what kind of set Ben Baller off. All of a sudden, he went on his own podcast. It's some new podcast that he has with some other guy and got upset that he was called a dweeb. I was just like, oh man, he gets called way worse on Twitter every single time he's mentioned or quote tweeted. So maybe the difference was he was like at mentioned and that's why he saw it and he got upset with them. And then, you know, he did some jokes on the Sneak Diss guys on his podcast. And full disclosure, of course, as Greg and George are friends of the show. And he went at them and they were all just like juvenile jokes. They weren't even that funny. I was just like, if you guys are going to podcast beef, at least be funny with it. And at least when Greg and George responded on their own podcast, they at least were funny about it. But this whole thing, starting off with being called a dweeb, was just hilarious. You know, when someone proves the very thing that they're trying to deny, and it's like if you're a boss and you got to fire someone, hey, Kenny, we're going to have to let you go here because, you know, some of your coworkers are saying you fly off the handle and you get really angry at people. And then the person you're firing, Kenny here, gets really angry with you and starts flying off the handle, you know, proving the very thing that you're firing them for. And this is the same thing. You call someone a dweeb and they go on their podcast and they give a dweeb response, like a juvenile response. So, and you know, he is this sneaker OG. He was there in those early days, but he doesn't get the recognition he deserves because he's a huge liar all the time and he's unlikable. And so, you know, he probably would get that recognition if he was just likable, but here we are. He's not likable. So podcast beefs are back. You know, I've joked about this is just how men mark time in modern eras, podcast beefs. Also back, collab beefs, Cortez and Palace. We are so back. This is an all beans on toast UK beef. This started when Palace dropped a Brazil tracksuit that was similar to a Brazil one that Cortez had recently done. And both those Brazil tracksuits reference like a Nike tracksuit from the 2000s. And then Cortez alleged that they were going to release their own Tri-Ferg shirt, you know, logo, the Palace logo. When the drop happened, they didn't actually drop it. It loaded out of stock. You know, probably really never had any intention of dropping it. It's probably a good thing they didn't go any further. There's a rumor that Palace is supposedly in line for a Nike collab in 2025, in which case Palace and Cortez will be collab mates. So maybe Clint was just, you know, taking the piss, as they say, across the pond. And I don't know if I'm using that term correctly. Please don't send me beans on toast if I used it incorrectly. But one of the things I was thinking about, you know, in the last episode, I was talking about how it's this influencer era. And if you kind of make it a wider, you can just say it's a persona based era that we're in terms of people online and also people with these brands. It's harder to have a brand without a name and a face out there. And Palace is one of these old school brands that started a long time ago when you didn't need that. You don't really need to know who started Palace. Like, do you know who the co-founders are exactly by their names? I had to look it up. Lev Tanju and the other guy. I don't know what the other guy's name is. I forgot to write him down in my little document here. That's how nameless they are. Whereas Cortez, it's Clint, and this is just the era that we're in now. It's harder than ever to have a nameless, faceless brand. But collab beefs are back. We are so back. Next topic, it's so over, is the Yeezy era officially at Adidas. They announced that they've settled all their lawsuit, that there's going to be no money changing of hand, and that they are basically done with each other. And then if you just look at it at the big bag fumble that Kanye did over all this, he could have made so much money for so much longer than what we got here. It was really just 2016 to 2023. So this has been talked about a lot, but it's officially over. He walked away from all that money, all because he wanted to praise Hitler or whatever. There's a song I like called Everyone Choose Sides by a band called The Wrens, and there's a line in there that says, I've walked away from more than you can imagine and I sleep just fine. And that's Kanye. That's him. He's walked away from so much money just so he can say whatever he wants. And it turns out I personally don't really give a shit whatever he has to say these days. But I'm sure he sleeps just fine at night. Next topic, Bread Ones come back in 2025. We are so back. However, they come in an 85 cut with a $250 price tag. It's so over. I don't know why I sound like I'm trying to do a TikTok here. I'm really not. I'm still working on this segment. It's still a work in progress. Next up, the Complex Sneaker Pod. It's so over? They only post every few weeks now. And a lot of the topics they don't even cover on their podcast anymore. Like full details on the James Whitner case, Tom Sachs maybe. I don't know if they covered that. Or maybe all their money is going to Travis Scott for ComplexCon. So whatever it is, hopefully they're all still getting paid the same to do fewer shows. Also related to Complex, women on the Sneaker of the Year panel. It's so over, I guess? They announced that the panelists this year are going to be Lil Yachty, PJ Tucker, and the three guys from the Complex show. And of course, what's notable is there's no women on the panel. And first up, a disclaimer, I'm not trying to be out in front leading the charge on women's representation or anything. That's something that I think women should be out there and talking about, and they are out there and talking about this. And of course, women want representation. They deserve representation. Women often make a sneaker hot, and this is not just in the GR world. It also includes the resale world. Women made the New Balance 9060 hot. Women made Sambas hot. That's on the GR side. On the hype side, there's Wales Bonner, CPFM. There's just so many examples. It's not even worth it getting into, but as far as Complex is concerned, I don't know how they operate over there. I don't know who decides what and why. If they asked a bunch of women and they couldn't make it, if Vashti was busy that day, I don't know if it's just a business decision, if they just look at their ticket buyers for ComplexCon and see that it's 90% men, and so we gotta make a show for the 90% men that are coming to this thing. I don't know. So, if you want to know, I think it's worthy to ask them. Ask Arya Hughes, the editor-in-chief. Ask Noah Callan-Bever, the head of content. Ask Jola Puma, or whoever decides on these ComplexCon panels. So, ask them if it was deliberate, or an oversight, or a schedule conflict, or was it a business decision? And that's what women have been doing on Twitter. A lot of women being vocal about it, and that's good. They deserve to say that, and people, I just hope, are listening on the other side. But I don't know what you're going to get from Complex. They're not exactly pillars and guides for cultural representation. They've always clearly shown over the years what they care about and what they want to talk about publicly. And some of the stuff they don't talk about publicly, and they don't feature smaller community people. They feature big guests for big audiences, which often means showing the same people over and over and doing the same things and preserving their own spot. And they don't care about being on the forefront of things, being ahead of things, ahead of the curves, being, out there and showing that they're on top of things. Often they show that they're behind on things, that they're playing catch up on things. So this is why I was asking people to, start creating your own content out there for the love of the game, as I said it. And there's a need for it because you're not going to get it from these complex types. So yes, of course, I think it is worthy of calling them out on it. I've called them out by name. I've called out Arya Hughes and Noan Callan Bever and Joe LaPuma and everyone else there. And you're going to have to call them out by name if you're going to want an answer from them. And I don't know if you're going to get an answer from them. They're not the types to answer that kind of stuff. So, and of course, it would be great to get recognition from these kind of places, from places that have accomplished things and done things. But if they've never done that before, I just don't believe that they're going to do it now. So we are so back. The sock man shitting on complex, I guess. All right. All that was recorded November 8th and 9th, and there's been some updates since then. So first off, let me do a quick recap of events so that you're all caught up and just to explain what this is all about. I also want to add that you might not care about this topic at all. It's a little inside baseball. It's about sneaker media and conflicts of interest and how sneaker stuff is covered. And if you just like sneakers and you don't care about this kind of stuff, that's what I mean, that this segment is probably not for you. So I will talk about a little bit more than that. There's a little bit more nuance to this whole thing, but I recognize that for some people, it's not too deep, as they say. It's just sneakers, as they say. Just shut up and wear your sneakers. So if you want to wear your sneakers and not care about any of this stuff, feel free to skip this whole segment and we'll catch you on the next episode. But for everyone else, here we go. This is all related to James Whitner and Complex Editor-in-Chief Arya Hughes having a potential conflict of interest. And then about the topic of James Whitner moving over to Adidas and if it was covered or not because of that alleged conflict of interest. So the timeline of events, this is the short version. These are the facts. The Complex Editor-in-Chief appears in a teaser video for Ama Manier's While You're Sleeping Jordan campaign video. Next, she interviews James Whitner on her own YouTube show and does not disclose that she appeared in a promotional video for him. So those are the facts. Now, my opinion is that alone is enough to give the appearance of a conflict of interest. If you are an editor-in-chief and you are in promotional videos for him, and then you are interviewing him and giving the appearance of tough questions, and really they're just softball questions and not following up on other questions. So why is it a conflict of interest? If you're wondering, I'll spell it out because media literacy ain't what it used to be, but also so that we're all just on the same page. The issue is that an editor-in-chief of a news organization, or they're not really news, more of a media organization, may have to write stories about subjects. And if you have a business relationship with them on a personal level, then that would affect the coverage. You would give them favorable coverage. Like, say, the subject gets investigated by the feds, for example. So the whole thing to me felt like it was promotional, like it was part of James Whitner's image rehab. I want to add that I don't know if this is a personal relationship that they have, or if it's an actual complex relationship they have with James Whitner, or if there is a relationship at all, if it's just, a handshake agreement or whatever. There's a slight difference where, if you do personal gains from something you get at work, it's called the corporate opportunity doctrine in legal terms, to flex some more legal business jargon at you. That's basically saying that if you find opportunities or investments through your work, then those opportunities actually belong to the company and not to you personally. And like I said, I'm not a business guy. I'm not a legal guy. I'm just a person who has to do code of conduct and security and privacy and stuff all the time, every year. That's why I know about this stuff. And then shortly after that, like a week or so later, it was reported by Lois Sakani, friend of the show, Lois Sakani of Snubbat and Sneaker Fetish Kari, that James Whitner's Whitaker Group is in talks with Adidas on a potential multi-sneaker collection. And so I go on to talk about James Whitner and Adidas on that last podcast episode. And if you want to listen to it, what I had to specifically say about Arya Hughes, the editor-in-chief, that's at the 50-minute mark if you haven't already. I also suggest you go re-listen to that segment because apparently some people have criticized me for trying to tear a black woman down. So The internet is coming for you. The internet comes for you eventually. They're coming to snuff the rooster. But the sock man is not going to die. I'm confident in my words that I said. I'm confident that I was criticizing the office of the editor-in-chief of Complex. That's it. So since that episode, Complex did not write about the potential James Whitaker Group deal with Adidas. They did not write about it. They did not talk about it on their podcast or YouTube shows at all. I find it very interesting because normally they'll write about any rumor. If Z Sneakerhead says a black tongue Jordan 5 is going to retro, it's up on the site and all the socials within minutes. If Whorehead Sales says a purple Jordan 4 Travis is coming in 2025, they'll have it out in minutes. They pay people to just copy paste other people's tweets if there's even a smidgen of news. And it's also interesting because their sneaker reporter, Brendan Dunn, proudly talks about how he is the trusted source for verifying stories, that he's got the real deal, not these other online internet sleuths. Don't trust those internet sleuths out there. You can trust Brendan Dunn. He is the authority on sneakers. He will give you the real deal. That's his entire profile. So on this topic, what did he have to say? Jack squat. He didn't say a single thing about it on the podcast, didn't write a single word about it, no tweet, nothing. The story about James Whitner potentially crossing the Beaverton River from Nike to Adidas, not worth mentioning to Brendan Dunn. So all this kind of stuff, they don't like when I talk about this. They don't like that I bring this up, that they're not talking about certain subjects or there's conflict of interest. It makes them uncomfortable. They don't want it being talked about. Even though all of it can be explained with a very short disclaimer, anything, but they don't want to do it because they're the authority in sneakers or whatever. So then earlier this week, we get our first look at this Whitaker Group Adidas sneaker on November 11th. It's a black superstar with a kings and queens theme on it, which is apparently a collaboration with Whitaker Group's 38A art gallery. He's got a store, a hotel, an art gallery now. Whatever it is, it's most likely James Whitner's name on the contracts. He's the one signing the contracts. So people can have the opinion that this is no big deal. This is just some art gallery, small thing. I am on the other side. I think this is potentially a huge story, especially if James Whitner is leaving Nike and Jordan, which is very much possible. And it's also possible that he stays. So when this story came out that the sneaker is real, it's coming out, Lois Sakani and Kari were flexing, saying basically, I told you so, because they got, the brunt of all that blowback that you guys don't know what you're talking about. You guys aren't trusted reporters. You guys are not the authority in sneakers. So that was a perfect time for me to jump in and talk about the conflict of interest, because I've talked about it on the podcast, but, I don't really mention people and I don't hammer it on Twitter. I let the words on the podcast do most of the heavy lifting. So I quote tweet and essentially allude to the conflict of interest. I don't even use the word conflict of interest, but I'm going to use it a lot, as you've been probably hearing here. So I use the Brian Windhorse theme where it's like he's, contemplating. And I say, now why didn't Complex, whose editor-in-chief was talent in a Nama Manier While You're Sleeping video, report or try to verify about the potential Whitner and Adidas collaboration at all? And this tweet, I had a feeling that, she would see it. I had a feeling it would be dropped in a Slack or copy pasted, a screenshot or whatever. So I added a second tweet on there. And this tweet said, quote, everyone wants to be a journalist. No one wants to do the work. They want to be talent, end quote. And that was probably the tweet that got her upset, and I can understand that. And even that, I said more directly on the last podcast episode, on the record and directly, citing her by title and name. And basically my intent was to show, hey, look, there's a potential conflict of interest here. And we saw it play out when there's this non-reporting of the Adidas story. And, I was probably just going to mention it in the next episode when I talk about upcoming sneakers. And that's it. It would have been like a 1 or 2 minute segment. That's it. Because, I understand that Complex is not the New York Times, that they don't have these standards of the New York Times or anything. It's all fluff. It's all sneakers. It's all hobby based. You're covering the product, so you have to be in favor with the people making the product. I understand that. But a conflict of interest is a conflict of interest, even if it's just a perceived conflict of interest. If you disclose it, then you've mitigated it. It doesn't really matter as much. It doesn't sting as much. But if it's not disclosed, then people like me who are interested in media coverage and stuff are free to criticize it fairly. And her perception is it probably was not fair, that I was too harsh on it. And honestly, a lot of that I think is probably the understanding that I have of what an editor-in-chief is and what it currently is in this current modern era. You know, okay, I did the Google AI definition thing. I just looked it up and I'm going to tell you what they say here. This says, the editor-in-chief manages the editorial team, it sets the tone, it makes decision, it represents the publication publicly. They also do, of course, writing and reviewing content and making budgets and overall being the final boss, but also, setting the standard of what they believe the media organization should be, how they should be represented in the topic area that they cover. And so if James Whitner is plugged into that person, that affects a lot of things. It affects what they can talk about on Twitter, what they can write about, what they can do on YouTube or on their podcast or at ComplexCon. So with this conflict of interest, does James Whitner have final edit on any story about him, on any of his subsidiary companies? Does he have final edit on his appearance on the YouTube show, or when they're going to talk about an upcoming sneakers until the embargo date is done? He probably doesn't have final edit, but he probably does have a say in that. Does he have final edit on stories about him backdooring and feds and all that kind of stuff? Probably not, but because of the other stuff, the company itself sets the tone and will not write about that stuff as hard as they could. And then not disclosing any of this perceived conflict of interest of being in the movie and then being on the show and not disclosing it, that gives me room to speculate on whatever I want, honestly, because they did not disclose it. I can say James Whitner probably has a final edit on any story about him. He might have a login to the complex WordPress and he could be writing stories himself. He could be on the computer like that Monte Ellis gif typing it up right now. Most likely he doesn't, but who's to say? So in this case, maybe that's not what an editor-in-chief does at Complex or other places like technology or video game companies. It's something completely different now. Maybe it's more about protecting relationships with the companies that you cover and being in charge of brand deals. And it's not what my definition, what I think a editor-in-chief is, which is setting the tone on coverage among the staff and, the final boss of a place. Maybe there's just way more involved than having a final boss that can do that now. I don't know. But if you're going to go the sponsored, promotional, brand deal way, which there are some rumors that they're apparently going to do that much more with Nike. I don't know if those rumors are unfounded or not. I guess we'll see how it plays out. But if you're going to do that, then go full on and do that. You can't also then be pushing someone like Brendan Dunn and saying this is the respected sneaker journalist. You can trust him. He always gets it right, not those other guys. Can I trust him? If we're going into a lane where everything is undisclosed and promotional all the time, then I'm not sure if I can. And as I've talked about on many podcasts now, trust is the most important thing there is in business and personal relationships and everything. So later that day, Aria Hughes has seen my tweets and has posted a response on her Instagram story. That story was screenshot and sent to me. I don't follow her on anything. I don't snoop on her Instagram stories. I wouldn't have seen it otherwise if it wasn't sent to me. And this is the only screenshot I've seen. I haven't seen anything that she has said before or after on her Instagram. So I'll read it out and I'll give my response. But overall, the short version is I took some shots at her. She took some shots at me. I responded immediately on Twitter. And that was largely it. I haven't really talked about it on Twitter since then because it was, over. So I'm responding here because I'm loyal to my podcast audience. Because if anyone has seen those tweets, I know that they'll want to hear my full thoughts on it. And so I'm giving you my full thoughts here with all the context and nuance explained so that it's hopefully clear. That's kind of what I do on this podcast. If I didn't have a podcast, it would have been over already, but I do have one and I do get to talk about whatever I want on here. And I say all this because I might get some goalposts moving like, oh, he can't get over it or he's got nothing else to talk about. And honestly, the entire outline that I had for this podcast had to be moved to the next episode because of it. So I have plenty that I could be talking about all the time here. Just look back on 75 episodes to see that I'm not afraid to yap on sneakers. So just want to put that disclaimer out there in case that's said. I can at least snip this part and post it. So Aria Hughes posts on her Instagram and says, quote, "Someone just sent me some screenshots from sneaker Twitter, LMAO. All I'll say is this, whatever vindication/attention y'all are seeking, I pray you find it. And it's very easy to critique from wherever you are, knowing you would never approach me, let alone say a word to my face. That's my issue. Y'all have hard-ons for people who wouldn't even know who you were if you were in the same room. And y'all be loud and wrong talking about my journalism skills. No one is above critique, but don't disrespect me. I work very hard and have been for a very long time. Go outside and focus on something other than sneakers. God bless you and your podcast. I hope it reaches whatever heights of success you'd like for it to reach." End quote. You remember how I said in my perception of an editor-in-chief is that they set the tone of how they want the organization to be, and they also represent the organization publicly. And so here it is. Here she is setting the tone. And we're squabbling now, I guess, but it's obvious reading this that she doesn't know anything about me or listen to anything I've said on any podcast, and just seen some screenshots of tweets, I guess, which is fine. I don't expect anyone to have seen or heard everything I've said. And if they think of me as a critic, I understand not wanting to see anything I have to say about them, even if they get sent a screenshot or whatever, just like how I saw the screenshot from her Instagram story. But let's break this down. Number one, she thinks I'm some troll looking for attention, looking for clout. And complex people think that if you criticize them with facts and opinions, then you're looking for clout to build your name off complex, which is laughable itself. There's no clout to gain from complex. There's a lot of people that do not like complex. So why would I want to be associated with an entity that a lot of people have bad feelings about? They just can't comprehend that someone would make a fair criticism about the appearance of a conflict of interest, because this is sneakers and it's not that serious. Or they think, everyone just wants clout off them because, you think so highly of yourself that you are up here and everyone below you is just jealous. They just want clout off you. So they're all taking shots. Again, this is one of the things where as an editor-in-chief, you can set the tone of how you want to be perceived and how you outreach with the people in the community, if you so choose. Number two, your opinion doesn't matter because you're an anonymous coward who wouldn't say it to my face. So as I said, they only see these screenshots. They don't actually listen to what I've had to say. I've said my name on this podcast. I've shown my face on Twitter and on Instagram stories. Just search SockJig face reveal. You'll see me. I saw that and I was like, what? Why wouldn't I? I'd say it directly to your face. They think that you're some coward, some person who has no confidence. I got all the confidence in the world. I would say it to anyone's face. I said it to Joe LaPuma's face. I walked up to him. I introduced myself to him at the Kith Toronto event. It was only like a couple minutes. He said, "Oh, our biggest critic." And I said, "Hey, if I criticize you guys, it's because you guys have earned the right to be big enough to be criticized, and that it's never personal." I recapped that all in the Kith Toronto episode of this podcast if you want to hear more details about that. But because, my profile picture is not my smiling face, or I don't do TikToks and Instagram reels, then what I say doesn't matter because I'm anonymous. Like, if I had a TikTok video with my floating head in the corner and my hand pointing up to a screenshot of her in that while you were sleeping video, and then the next one is my floating head in the other corner pointing to a screenshot of James Whitner on her show and saying this is a conflict of interest, would it have more impact? It probably would, but I did not do that. I don't have the time to do that kind of stuff. I just used my words. And she can't believe that you all have hard-ons for people like this. Chat, do you have hard-ons for me as a listener right now? Do you have a hard-on for me? I apologize for saying hard-on. As an editor-in-chief, I'd recommend not using the word hard-ons and perhaps a more gender-neutral term than hard-ons, if you want to set the tone for your media organization. So even though this whole point is, just a deflection to not talk about the main conflict of interest thing that I brought up, but Greg of Sneak This Podcast talked about this recently on this last episode. He talked about me specifically in this whole thing and being anonymous. And what he said was that if SockJig me, that if I want to go at people, I probably do need to show my face in video. And he did not know what I looked like. He might not have seen the few times I have posted it or know my name. I know George a little bit better than I do Greg, but Basically, he's right. It would have more impact, not in terms of the point that I was trying to make, because a potential conflict of interest is still a potential conflict of interest. No matter if my profile picture is a logo or if it's my floating head on Instagram Reels pointing to a screenshot. And I have chosen not to. That's a decision I made for two main reasons. Number one, the more important one, is I promised my wife a long time ago I wouldn't jeopardize my career over sneaker shit. Just because the age we're in right now, anything can snowball to the point where, you get doxxed or reprimanded at work or whatever. I've obviously eased up a little bit on that since I first started, but I don't do video and my profile picture is not my smiling face. But also, me not showing my face is my limiter. That's my ceiling. I can't get to any next level because I don't show my face. So it can be thrown in your face that you don't show your face, but it also holds you back. And I am well aware that it does that. And I'm perfectly fine with it. And that's the thing I don't think a wider group can comprehend, that someone would want to do something for the love of the game. They think it's all just trolling. But, find any example where I tried to troll someone or made personal jokes about someone. You can't. I think the only personal joke I ever said was Brendan Dunn is short. He's 5'3", 5'3" with an attitude. That's the only time I've ever made a personal joke. But the other main reason is just simply that the content doesn't require it. I'm not a TikToker. I'm not an Instagram Reels guy. I'm not a sneaker photographer. I'm not good at those things. I'm a words guy. I use my words on Twitter and on here. So tweeting is easy for me, but podcasting, I'm not a natural at it at all. I just can't turn on the mic and the camera and just talk effortlessly. I don't have the time to be sitting in a room with a single camera on me and then editing all that together. Each episode of this podcast often takes me weeks, which I do either at lunchtime or early morning or after 10 p.m. when my kids are asleep. And that's if I have the energy that night to do it. So an episode like that on video, it would jump all over the place. It just does not lend itself to video at all. So I'm a words guy, and most of the time, the words can stand on their own. That's kind of how I've always approached it. But I understand that if I want to challenge people and criticize them, that would have more impact if I showed my face. That, I think, is at least a valid point. And even this, I've talked about in a previous episode, that I do have some regrets about it because of representation. I'm a Sikh Punjabi man. My people have very little representation in sneakers. We got the Curry 13 and we got Pharrell appropriating some Holy NMD sneakers. That's it. That's the only representation that my people have. I could have did a little bit more to improve that. So I am, of course, open to it in the future. But at this time, with the time that I have, it's just not in the cards right now. Okay, so back to the screenshot, just a couple more points. She said, I was loud and wrong about her journalism skills, and says that no one is above critique, but don't disrespect me. So that's as close as we got to the explanation of the conflict of interest, which is not really an explanation at all. It just says that I'm wrong about it, but we don't get any explanation as to why I was wrong. But she obviously feels disrespected. Now, was I harsh in my critique of her profession? Yeah, probably. Was I to the point where she felt disrespected and took it personally? Okay. But what I said that was wrong, that part was not explained. But given the past history that I have with Complex, I totally get it. It's because of that past history. The other one she says is go outside. And go outside is just code for, get out of my face. Or you're a loser that's online too much. Or no one cares what you have to say, so just kind of go away. And if someone tells you just go outside, that's not offensive. But it's the last part, what she added on, and go focus on something other than sneakers. And that's where, I could take that as they don't want you to talk about sneakers. They don't want to be critiqued. They don't want to have anyone take any shots at them. And even that's fine. Like, if that's all the note said, that's at least fair. It's a bit condescending at times, but like I said, given the past history, that part I get. But the very last thing that she says is, God bless you and your podcast. I hope it reaches whatever heights of success you'd like it to reach, end quote. And this is the editor-in-chief who sets the tone for Complex, basically looking down from her ivory tower. I don't think it's made of ivory. It's probably in Times Square, so it's probably made of neon signs. Looking down and saying, good luck with your tiny little podcast. Basically saying, all you down there, it doesn't matter what you people do. A pat on the head for your little podcast from me, the editor-in-chief of Complex. She's basically telling everyone who's got their own little independent podcast that do it for the love of the game that she thinks that all that is bullshit. Even this, I want to make clear. Yeah, I'm not a journalist. I'm a content creator, unfortunately. That's the best word for it. I don't work for an organization. Like I've said multiple times, I do this for the love of the game. But I do take it seriously as if I was a professional. Like if I'm going to talk about data privacy, I take it very seriously. Any deep dive I've done, I've talked about in detail, like the business focused stuff or ethics in design contests in the design world or conflict of interest in journalism. And people in those industries have complimented me and told me I got it right. Lawyers have told me that your kind of summary was pretty much accurate. And those are professions that are not my own. And the stuff that is my own, like the tech stuff and the privacy policy stuff, I know my shit in that. So if she just sees me as some content creator or as a journalist, either way, it's punching down. And that is because there's a double standard here for good reason. She's the editor-in-chief of a large media organization. The rules are just simply different. And I'm not trying to have it both ways here. I'm saying it doesn't really make a difference if I'm an independent content creator or if I'm an independent journalist with an independent podcast. There's no real difference because I'm independent and a single person. Say I worked at Nice Kicks, who would be considered an equal in stature to Complex. Would she be saying God bless with your shitty little podcast? Probably not, because they are at the same level. But because you do it independently, then look at the little people down there. Look at those losers with their little podcast. Why do people have hard-ons for those losers down there with their podcast? Look at the little people with the little hard-ons. All the little who's down in Whoville's got boners for some podcaster. Headline news. Complex editor-in-chief wants to know all about your hard-on in your pants. Are you in those side-by-side Cialis, Viagra tubs right now with your spouse listening to me talk on the Bluetooth speaker? So yes, independent podcasters and people on Twitter have the home court advantage when it comes to criticizing and punching up and even can cross the line at being unfair. But if those editors-in-chiefs and people working at the sneaker brands fight back and, which they obviously have the right to fight back, but if they fight back and cross the line and say something unfair, then they are punching down. That is just the difference in status in working on your own, on a home court, on Twitter, versus being an editor-in-chief at a large media organization or a role at a large sneaker company. And obviously, I'm very proud of this podcast. I've been able to accomplish a lot, I feel. And, a lot of people are very unhappy with their spot in the sneaker space. They want to be seeded sneakers or brand deals or get that YouTube 100K subscriptions plaque, or to be called a leader or whatever. I'm actually quite happy with my spot in the sneaker space. And that's exactly the secret sauce of this whole thing. That's what makes the podcast special, that it's punk rock, that I'm free to talk about whatever I want. I can take it in any direction, and I can say a lot of things that others simply can't say. Like last episode, I said Phil Knight and Mark Parker are to blame for putting a DTC CEO in place. If a Complex employee said that, they'd probably be fired. But someone who just sees screenshots of tweets that are mean to them, they're not going to understand the secret sauce of the whole thing. They're just going to see the mean tweets. And I get it. And as I'm talking here, like I wrote down an outline of all the things that I've been able to accomplish or things I called and things like that. And, I don't need to run it down. You've probably already heard it all. So all that I'm proud of. And I can challenge anyone to start a podcast like this as an outsider. And go make an account with a gimmick name on the platform of your choice without using any your connections or anything like that. Just using your words. Simple as that. No photos, no videos, just your words. And do it for the love of the game. But people with YouTube brain and complex brain, they'll never get it. They'll never understand it. But I will. I'll subscribe. So the last thing I want to clear up is about my initial response to the screenshot that I was defending myself on Twitter. And I said, I would say all this to her face, actually. The Complex editor-in-chief has a lot to say about me and not about representation at her own Sneaker of the Year panel, it seems. End quote. And then people took this the wrong way. People thought I was trying to criticize her about the representation thing on their panel, or people took it as me attacking her because she's a black woman. And obviously that's wrong. That's got nothing to do with it. And as I tried to clear up in the follow-up tweet the next day, that I was criticizing the office of the editor-in-chief. That's it. The Sneaker of the Year panel thing, It was basically me referring to the controversy of that day, the day before, saying, you have a lot to say about me and not about this much more important topic over here. Maybe people would like to hear from you about that topic, which is what I recapped in the earlier segment. And obviously, I probably could have worded it better. Usually, I'm pretty good at this stuff, and I can tell where someone might twist a wording or something. But, I was probably angry, and that was just my initial angry response at the time. And often you're told, did you keep the same energy? Are you keeping the same energy for the previous editors-in-chiefs? And obviously asking me if I've been critical of Complex before. People who listen to this podcast obviously know that. I have a episode called Sockjig Addresses His Enemies. And the whole time, I always thought that Brendan Dunn was the editor-in-chief at that time during that BuzzFeed era. But apparently it was Joe LaPuma. And even that, I told him to his face. I kept the same energy, of course. And another feedback that I heard was that I got to give grace, that there's a lot more going on behind the scenes. And one person who is in the industry publicly replied to that tweet and basically said that Aria Hughes is not in charge of what happens at SneakerCon or filmed content at all. And again, my understanding of what an editor-in-chief being the final boss is obviously wrong then. And that is where the misunderstanding of this took place. The SneakerCon stuff, I understand where events and stuff could be an entirely different division. Filmed content, I naturally would assume that falls under content, but I guess that means all the YouTube shows and stuff. But maybe that is a totally different division. So at the time, I don't know what the internal structure and who reports to who, all that kind of stuff is at a place like this. I was just talking about it in good faith in my understanding of what an editor-in-chief is. And I, of course, admitted here that I may have been a bit harsh, and that's what naturally happens because of the past history that has happened between myself and Complex as an entity. It all really does revolve around that I assume that an editor-in-chief is a final boss, and I don't really know who's in charge of what. I don't know who decides the Sneaker of the Year panelists. So, I hope I'm not judged based on info that I'm not privy to. And if I'm judged that I should not speak on things at all because I don't know what's going on behind the scenes, I can disagree with that, and I can debate that I was only going by what was publicly said and publicly posted in videos and on YouTube shows. So anyways, I already recapped all that, but if black women or black men are defending Aria Hughes, I understand completely. And obviously I'm going to be very careful what I'm talking about here, and I'm going to make it about myself. So it's way easier that way. There's a code. I'm a Sikh Punjabi man. There's a code among us. I will not publicly put down any other Sikh Punjabi man or woman. There's many other people trying to put you down that you can't have your own people putting you down publicly. I live by this code, and honestly, it breaks my heart when other brown men don't know the code. Some brown man had once said some shit about me publicly, and I was just like, what the fuck? You don't know about the code? And I was just thinking that, of course. And I was more sad about it, that it's a failure, not just on this person, but on their parents and the whole structure. You start contemplating life and how other people live their lives, I guess. And this topic actually came up on Aria Hughes's interview with James Whitner, where James Whitner talked about him coming to Pierre Moss's defense about, the story that came out that he runs a shady business or whatever, and he publicly supported Pierre Moss. He basically said, everyone is attacking a black man, and I'm not going to do that. I'm going to support a black man. And I knew exactly what he was saying. He was talking about the code. So if black men or black women come to Aria Hughes' defense and they don't even know her, it's because of the code. I get it. All I can say is just go by my words and actions on what I've said on my Twitter, what I've said on my podcast, what I said in the last episode, who I've had on my podcast, who I've supported and platformed, who I've bought products from and donated to, and just generally been in the community and talked to. Just going by that, I know I got nothing to worry about. But obviously, if you get feedback from people that you like and respect, that you should reflect on what you've said and actions, that's important to me. And I have, and I did, and that's what I'm kind of talking about here. And I hope that I gave grace. And if I didn't, if I failed you in some way, if I made you upset, if you disagreed with any of the takes here, if you lost your boner, if you got soft serve in your pants right now, then I hope you can at least give me some grace. And if you can't, then you can go fuck yourself.